Greetings. Many of you wrote or told me that you enjoyed my video post last week, and I thought, well, I'll do another one, see if I have something of interest to you because I am such a geek whenever I find out something new about the Bible, especially if it has to do with archaeology. I get all excited and I want to tell everybody. And so, what I'd like to tell you about today is about a relatively obscure, and I say obscure because she kind of passed my notice, figure in the Bible. Her name is Joanna, and a man that I respect very much, Shane Rosenthal, who was actually the founder and the host of a Substack page called The Humble Skeptic. He was also one of the original creators of the White Horse Inn broadcast that he did for decades, which I have listened to in the past. Always respected the scholarship, always respected the interesting topics on there. And Shane, on his Humble Skeptic Substack, is talking recently about a short book that he's written. And I really urge you to look into this. You can get the first two chapters of the book free, but I'm going to give you a good reason why you want to get the whole book for a donation of any amount. First two chapters free, whole book, a donation of any amount. Why should you be excited about it, as excited as I am? Because it has to do with the book of Luke, and his book is about who is the key witness to Luke. Remember, unlike Matthew and Mark and John, Luke didn't claim to be an eyewitness to the events that he talks about. He had to get them from somebody, both for the book of Luke and the book of Acts. And so we have always assumed that he was in close community with the apostles and got the stories. And I've often wondered if Mary, who was still alive, apparently when about the time that he was writing, if he had heard stories from her. But this book by Shane Rosenthal posits the thought that it may have been Joanna. Now, what do we know about Joanna? One thing you may not have known about a Joanna is that recently an ossuary was found in the Jerusalem area, I believe, and the ossuary was that of a woman named Joanna, who was the granddaughter of a high priest named, wait for it, Theophilus. If you're a Bible student at all, you know that the beginning of the book of Luke and the beginning of the book of Acts start with an address to someone named Theophilus. Now, um, Joanna, we know in the Bible from two passages that are obvious. One of them is in Luke chapter 8, verse 3, and Joanna is listed as one of the women, apparently of some financial means, because she and other women go alongside Jesus as he's ministering, and they provide for him, it says, out of their own possessions. And the women that are mentioned are Mary Magdalene, Susanna, and others, but Joanna. And Joanna is mentioned, identified there as the wife of Herod's steward, Chuza, Chuza. Well, the word Chuza's name and his position as steward um, is interesting because it's actually the Greek word epitropos. And epitropos is translated in other places, not just to mean like a steward, like as Rosenthal points out, not like a steward on an airplane, somebody who just waits on you. It could actually mean, and actually means other places, a quite elevated position, such as viceroy. But another thing we know about Chusa is that he was the steward of Herod Antipas, and Herod Antipas, remember, is the one who was responsible for the beheading of John the Baptist. So we have a woman here who is involved and must have witnessed a lot of court intrigue. And Rosenthal actually makes a point, and I think a very good point, that not in the book of Luke, but in another gospel, the details of the beheading of John and the thoughts of Herod Antipas were told to some of his servants, which could have been, how someone like Joanna would have known these details. Now, we also know that she was of noble birth, and her husband was apparently a Nabatean. And we also catch up with Joanna the second time in the Bible with a really obvious statement is she is one of the witnesses of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. She's one of the first people at the tomb, and the people that come to the tomb are Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, Joanna, and then of course it says of other women. And so she uh, she represents a very important role here as a witness of the resurrection. Now, Rosenthal points out that it's not just that her name is listed there, but actually the way her name is listed is in a chiasm. And I don't know if you know what chiasmus is. It's a literary technique where you have a passage, and the first line in the passage and the last line are somewhat similar. The second, and the next to the last. And then as you get closer to the center, these are all paralleled. Well, guess who's at the center of the chiasm of this passage in Luke about witnessing the resurrection? Joanna. Her name is at the center of the chiasm. And Rosenthal makes the point, and I think it's a very good point, that when you have a chiasm, it's pointing to something. Just parenthetically, when I wrote my book, A Conspiracy of Breath, which is um, based on the premise that the writer of the book of Hebrews in the New Testament was Priscilla, I actually tried the challenge, and it's a little bit harder than you think it might be, to integrate a chiasm in the one of the passages in the book where Priscilla's giving birth. And I thought, well, that's a technique that would have been used in her time, and I actually tried doing that. Um, but what it could imply is that Joanna, being the center of this passage of a chiasm, and by the way, in the notes to this Substack, look down there, and I'll show you another example of a biblical chiasm, and I will also give you point you to some more information about that. But it could imply that Joanna was actually the central witness there among the women of the resurrection. Now, let's go back to Theophilus. And remember, we started off talking about the fact that this ossuary has been found. And the ossuary is of a woman named Joanna, who is the granddaughter of a high priest named Theophilus. I had always heard it said, and perhaps you have too, that perhaps Theophilus that Luke was addressing at the beginning of the book of Luke and the beginning of the book of Acts was actually just an idealized person because the word Theophilus means lover of God. So anybody could be a lover of God who and could benefit from the book of Luke or the book of Acts. The fact that it was thought to be a Greek is because the name is Greek. But very interestingly, I want to remind you that this ossuary that was found was of a woman named Joanna, who was the granddaughter of a high priest who was named Theophilus. And it's not unusual in New Testament times for people to have Latin names as well as, or Greek names, as well as a Hebrew name. Not unusual at all. Um, and also the role of a priest in the book of Luke and Acts are very prominent. And for instance, it's the servant of a high priest who cuts off the Peter's ear in the Gospels, of course. But I want to bring to your attention something else that Rosenthal brought up, and that is in Acts 6:7. It says that tens of thousands of priests became believers in the way, became believers in Jesus. So his premise is that could it be, and he's convinced me that the Theophilus to whom Luke was writing was actually the grandfather of Joanna. He also asks the question in this book: Is Joanna the same as Junia? And there's been a lot of controversy about this character Junia. I think it's in the book of Romans where it talks about her as being like an apostle, very prominent. Um, this book is just a treasure trove of information, of wonderings, but what makes the book itself worthwhile? And I said that I would tell you why it's worth making a donation to Rosenthal's Substack, which is the way, by the way, all of us on Substack, the way we make a living is by people supporting our ministries, supporting our writing. The reason you should do that for Rosenthal Shane Rosenthal, excuse me, is that, and if I've called him Sean through this, I'm very sorry. His name is Shane. Um, is because the appendices in this are pure gold. If you're at all interested in why epitrophos could mean anything other than steward, if you're at all interested in any of these other scriptures, how they're used, or yeah, like Theophilus, any of these things, the appendices in this are just pure gold. So I hope that you have enjoyed going along with me. I'm a Bible geek from the word beginning. If somebody comes up with something interesting and new and can document it, like Rosenthal has done, I'm in, and I think you would be too. So until next week, God bless you.